a man at the absolute peak of the world, with $1 billion company and a portfolio of homes that spanned continents. To his adoring public, Connor Reeves was a visionary. But to his pregnant wife Lauren, in the sterile silence of their glass penthouse, he was a stranger. He had just told her that the woman who had stood by him through poverty, the woman carrying his first child, was now a liability. She was too ordinary for the life he was building. He thought he was closing a chapter neatly excising his past. He had no idea she was about to write an ending he never saw coming. An ending that involved his own CEO, a full tank of jet fuel, and the keys to his entire kingdom. The air in the penthouse was different. It wasn't the recycled, climate-controlled air of their old two-bedroom apartment, which always smelled faintly of Lauren's oil paints and the burnt sugar from Connor's late-night creme brulee experiments. This air, 63 floors above the glittering sprawl of Austin, Texas, was thin, sterile, and smelled only of money and Windex. It was the smell of Connor's new life. Lauren Bishop stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, her hand resting protectively on the small, firm curve of her belly. 4 months. 4 months of carrying a secret that until tonight she had believed was a shared joy. Below the city was a river of light, a breathtaking vista of success. His success. Nexus Pay, the fintech startup they had poured their souls into, had gone public 6 months ago. They hadn't just become millionaires, they had catapulted into a stratosphere Lauren hadn't known existed. Connor Reeves, her Connor, the boy who used to patch his worn-out sneakers with duct tape, was now a billionaire. Their old life, the one built on shared dreams and ramen noodle dinners, had been packed away in boxes and stored in a facility somewhere in the city. A state-of-the-art climate-controlled facility, of course. Connor was meticulous about preserving assets. It seemed their history was now just another asset. He'd changed. It hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow erosion, a chipping away of the man she loved by the corrosive drip of wealth and adulation. First it was the clothes. His comfortable, worn-in flannels were replaced by bespoke suits from Savile Row that cost more than their first car. Then came the friends. Their old circle, the ones who had helped them move furniture and celebrated small victories with cheap beer, were gradually phased out, replaced by a flock of sleek, predatory socialites, venture capitalists with soulless eyes and aspiring influencers who laughed a little too loudly at Connor's jokes. Leading this new flock was Katrina Beaumont, a public relations guru whose specialty was sculpting the public image of the newly wealthy. With razor-sharp cheekbones and a voice like shattered ice, Katrina had convinced Connor that he wasn't just a CEO, he was a brand. And a brand needed to be curated. Lauren, with her love for quiet nights, her preference for worn paperbacks over glitzy galas, and her habit of wearing her heart on her sleeve, did not fit the brand. She heard the soft chime of the private elevator and turned. Connor stepped out, looking like he'd been carved from marble. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his Tom Ford suit immaculate. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with a relentless, twitchy energy. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I was waiting for you. I saved you some dinner." He didn't look up. "Had a tasting at Per Se with the Hamiltons. We're thinking of backing his new fusion restaurant. It's a branding play." He finally pocketed the phone, his eyes scanning the room, as if looking for a flaw. They settled on her. For a moment, a flicker of the old Connor seemed to surface, a hint of warmth. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You didn't go to the gallery opening with Katrina's group," he stated. It wasn't a question. "No, I wasn't feeling up to it," Lauren said, her hand instinctively going back to her belly. The morning sickness is more like all-day sickness lately. This was it. She had planned it all out. A quiet dinner, a bottle of sparkling cider for her, his favorite expensive scotch for him. She had the ultrasound photo tucked into a small silver frame hidden in the kitchen drawer. It was the perfect moment to tell him to bring them back to what was real, to what mattered. "You need to push through that, Lauren," he said, his tone clipped managerial. "These events are important. It's about visibility, presence. When you're not there, it creates a vacuum. People talk." A cold knot formed in her stomach. "What do they talk about, Connor?" He waved a dismissive hand, walking over to the vast minimalist bar. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we present a united front. The powerful, dynamic couple. It's the narrative Katrina is building." Lauren took a deep breath. "I have something to tell you. Something that's more important than narratives and branding." He took a sip of his drink, his back still to her. "If this is about the decor, I told you to let the interior designer handle it. I don't have the bandwidth for swatches and fabric samples." The cruelty of his indifference was a physical blow. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she willed them away. She would not cry. She walked over to the kitchen island, her movements feeling slow and heavy. She pulled the framed photo from the drawer and placed it on the marble countertop, turning it to face him. "We're having a baby, Connor." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more suffocating than any argument they'd ever had. He didn't move. He just stood there, a silhouette against the city lights. Finally, he turned his face unreadable. He walked slowly toward the island and looked down at the grainy black-and-white image of a tiny comma-shaped being. Their child. Lauren held her breath, praying for a spark of joy for the man she married to reappear. He looked up from the photo, his eyes meeting hers. There was no joy. There was no warmth. There was only a chillingly calm, analytical froideur. "How far along are you?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. 14 weeks, she whispered, her heart starting to pound a painful, frantic rhythm against her ribs. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting from her face around the vast, empty apartment, and then back to her. He saw her simple maternity dress, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. He saw the woman who had proofread his business plans, who had comforted him after failed investor meetings, who had believed in him when no one else did. And in his eyes, she saw his verdict. "Lauren," he began, and the sound of her name on his lips was like a death sentence. "We need to talk about the trajectory of my life, of our life." "Our life," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You mean your life? I seem to be just a background character in it lately." "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice dropping. It was the voice he used when he was about to fire someone. "The brand, the company, it's entering a new phase. It's global. It requires a certain aesthetic, a certain kind of partner. Someone who can command a room in Davos, who can charm a Saudi prince who looks at home on the cover of a magazine." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart piercing through years of love and shared history. "And I'm not that woman," she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. He had the decency to look away, to stare out at his glittering kingdom below. "You were perfect for the man I was, Lauren. Truly. But I'm not that man anymore. He finally looked at her, his expression a mask of detached pity. You're a wonderful person, but you're too ordinary for where I'm going. Too ordinary. The words hung in the sterile air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Ordinary. The woman carrying his child. The woman who knew he was terrified of thunderstorms and sang off key in the shower. The woman who held the copyright to his soul, or what was left of it. And the baby she managed to choke out. Is our child going to be too ordinary for you as well? Of course not, he said quickly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. The child will be a Reeves. He or she will have every advantage. The best schools, the best connections. We'll handle this. My legal team will draw up a very, very generous arrangement. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. You won't have to worry about a thing. He was talking about their baby, their life as if it were a hostile takeover, a merger and acquisition. He wasn't dissolving a marriage. He was divesting from an underperforming asset. Lauren stared at him, the man she no longer recognized. The love she had felt for him curdled into something cold and hard in her chest. It was a strange, terrifying feeling, like watching a precious photograph burn to ash. In that moment, she wasn't just heartbroken. She was awake. The fog of her love for him, which had blinded her to the slow, creeping horror of his transformation, had finally lifted. She saw him clearly for the first time in months, a hollow man in a beautiful suit, rattling around in a gilded cage of his own making. I see, she said, her voice eerily calm. She picked up the ultrasound photo, her fingers tracing the silver frame. Thank you for your clarity, Connor. He seemed relieved by her composure. Good. I knew you'd be practical about this. It's for the best. For everyone. He turned to go back to his phone, his meetings, his branding plays. He thought the conversation was over. He thought she would meekly accept his generous arrangement and disappear. He had no idea that in the ashes of her heart, a plan was beginning to form. A plan that was anything but ordinary. She wouldn't just leave. She would make him understand what he had thrown away. And she wouldn't be doing it alone. She thought of the one other person who had seen the change in Connor. The one other person who had a stake in the real soul of Nexus Pay. A man who in a recent board meeting had looked at Connor's flashy, reckless proposals with an expression of deep concern. Daniel Cole, the CEO of Nexus Pay. Connor's right-hand man. And Lauren suddenly realized her only possible ally. For 2 days, Lauren existed in a state of suspended animation. She moved through the ridiculously large penthouse like a ghost. The city lights outside mocking her with their indifferent sparkle. Connor was barely there, engrossed in a whirlwind of meetings and calls about a new European expansion. He treated her with a detached professional courtesy, as if she were a departing employee serving out her notice period. He'd occasionally ask if she'd eaten or if she needed anything. The questions delivered with the same impersonal tone he used with the household staff. The generosity he had promised arrived in the form of an email from his personal lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Pike, with a name as sharp and bloodless as his prose. The email CC'd to Connor outlined the terms of a proposed separation agreement. It was, as Connor had promised, generous, a lump sum that would make her eyes water a year ago, a monthly stipend, a deed to a luxury condo in a respectable but not headline-grabbing part of the city. But then came the clauses buried in the legalese, a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would gag her for life. and the custody section. It proposed a joint arrangement, but with stipulations that clearly paved the way for Connor to assume primary custody once the child was old enough for a nanny and a boarding school. It spoke of providing the child with a globally relevant upbringing, a phrase that sounded suspiciously like it had been penned by Katrina Beaumont herself. He wasn't just trying to erase her from his life. He was planning to eventually erase her from their child's life, too. That was the moment the ice in her veins turned to steel. Grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. She was now a mother fighting for her child. She thought back to Daniel Cole. Daniel was the operational genius Connor had brought in as CEO 2 years before the IPO. While Connor was the visionary, the public face Daniel was the one who made the trains run on time. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with a quiet, observant demeanor that stood in stark contrast to Connor's burgeoning flamboyance. Lauren had always liked him. He spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinion on design elements for the new office, remembering the name of her favorite author after she'd mentioned it once in passing. More importantly, she had seen the look in his eyes during recent company events. As Connor boasted about buying a sports team or commissioning a multi-million-dollar yacht, Lauren had caught Daniel's gaze. It was a look of profound disappointment, a quiet alarm that mirrored her own. Daniel wasn't one of Connor's new sycophants. He was a steward of the company they had all built. Finding his private number was a risk. It was stored in Connor's old phone, the one he'd discarded for the latest model. Lauren found it in a drawer of obsolete tech, a graveyard of his former life. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the contacts. Daniel C. Private. It felt like a betrayal, a step into a world of corporate espionage she didn't understand. But what choice did she have? She dialed the number before she could lose her nerve. He answered on the second ring. Cole. His voice was crisp, professional. Daniel. It's Lauren. Lauren Bishop, Connor's wife. There was a pause. She could hear the faint sound of traffic in his background. He was probably in his car. Lauren, is everything all right? His tone shifted etantly, laced with genuine concern. No, it's not, she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. I need to talk to you. Urgently. And it has to be somewhere Connor will never find out about. Another pause, longer this time. She could imagine the calculations running through his head. The risk to his position, the implications of getting involved in his boss's domestic affairs. She was about to apologize, to tell him to forget it, when he spoke. There's a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind on 3rd and Brazos. It's old-fashioned, no one goes there. Can you be there in an hour? Yes, she said, relief washing over her. Thank you, Daniel. Be safe, Lauren, he said, and hung up. Lauren dressed carefully, choosing a simple, dark dress and a large scarf to cover her hair. She slipped out of the penthouse, using the service elevator, her heart pounding with every floor she descended. She took a regular taxi, a relic in her new world of private drivers, the scent of cheap air freshener, a strangely comforting anchor to reality. The Daily Grind was exactly as he'd described, a relic from another time, smelling of burnt coffee and old newspapers. Daniel was already there, tucked into a booth in the back corner. He stood up as she approached. In his simple chinos and a button-down shirt, he looked more like a college professor than the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth. What's going on? He asked, his gaze direct and serious. She didn't hold back. The words tumbled out of her, the too ordinary speech, the cold, clinical way Connor had reacted to the pregnancy, the lawyer's email, the chilling custody clauses. She spoke of her fear, not just for herself, but for her baby, and for the man Connor had become. Daniel listened without interrupting his expression, growing more grim with every word. When she finally finished, she was breathless, emotionally spent. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Lauren, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not entirely surprised." "You're not? I've seen the change in him," Daniel said, his voice low. "The IPO, it did something to him. He started listening to the wrong people. Katrina Beaumont has him convinced that image is more valuable than substance. He's making reckless financial decisions, pushing for vanity projects that have no real ROI. He wants to acquire a luxury fashion brand, for God's sake. We're a payment processing company." He sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I've tried to counsel him to remind him of our core mission of the company we set out to build. He sees it as a lack of vision. He told me last week I was thinking too small." Now it was Lauren's turn to be unsurprised. Connor was shedding everyone who reminded him of his ordinary past, and that included the man who preached fiscal responsibility over flash. "The board is getting nervous," Daniel continued. "His erratic behavior, his spending, it's a liability. But he's the founder, the majority shareholder. His name is synonymous with the brand. Removing him would be corporate suicide. We're trapped." "I'm trapped too," Lauren whispered, her hand on her belly. "He'll use his money and power to crush me, Daniel. He'll paint me as an unstable gold digger and take my child." Daniel's eyes, which were usually a calm analytical grey, seemed to harden. "No, he won't." The conviction in his voice startled her. "How can you be so sure?" He looked around the dingy coffee shop, then leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Because we're not going to let him. You said you want to leave, to disappear, somewhere he can't find you, at least for a while. To get a head start, to build a case, to have your baby in peace." "Yes, that's exactly what I want." "Then that's what we'll do," Daniel said. "But leaving isn't enough. You need leverage. Something to stop him from coming after you with the full force of his legal army." "What kind of leverage?" Daniel's expression turned cunning, and for the first time, Lauren saw the shrewd strategist that had helped build Nexus Pay from the ground up. Connor's greatest strength is his public image, his brand. If we tarnish that, we wound him where he's most vulnerable. And his greatest asset, the one that gives him all his power, is the company jet. The Gulfstream G650. It was Connor's favorite toy, a gleaming silver dart that he used to shuttle his new friends to Aspen for ski weekends and to the Caribbean for impromptu parties. He'd named it the Nexus. "The jet is registered as a corporate asset," Daniel explained. "I, as CEO, have the authority to schedule it for company business. Emergency board meetings, site visits, investor relations. The justifications are endless." A slow, audacious idea began to dawn on Lauren. "You mean he's hosting the Innovators Gala at the Penthouse on Friday night?" Daniel said, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. "He'll be distracted, surrounded by 100 of his new best friends. The jet is scheduled to be on standby at the Austin Executive Airport for a potential trip to Zurich on Saturday morning. A trip I know he's not taking." He leaned back, watching her reaction. "I could be called away for an urgent company matter. I could need to fly out immediately, and I could, for security and support, require a trusted consultant to come with me." Lauren's heart was hammering against her ribs. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a wild, terrifying thrill. This was insane. It was audacious. It was perfect. It wasn't just an escape. It was a statement. Taking the ultimate symbol of his new life with the help of his own CEO. He would be furious, Lauren breathed. He would be apoplectic, Daniel corrected her. He would be publicly humiliated. Connor Reeves, the man who controls everything, can't even control his own plane. It would create exactly the kind of chaos and doubt we need. It would give you time, and it would give me leverage with the board. It would force them to see how unstable he's become. Where would we go? I have a house on the coast of Oregon. It's quiet, private, and under a different holding company name. No one would ever think to look for you there. It's the perfect place to lie low and plan your next move. I've already got a name for you. The best family law attorney in the state. Audrey Kane. She eats men like Connor for breakfast. Lauren looked at Daniel, truly looked at him. He wasn't just helping her. This was a coup planned with the precision of a military operation. Her personal crisis was the catalyst he needed to protect the company. They both cared about the company Connor was driving into the ground. Their goals were aligned. "Why are you doing this, Daniel?" she asked quietly. "It's a huge risk for you." He met her gaze, and his expression softened. "Because I remember the early days. I remember Connor talking about changing the world of finance for the little guy. I remember you sitting in our crappy little office designing the user interface because we couldn't afford a graphic designer making it simple and accessible for everyone. You were the original nexus of Nexus Pay, Lauren. You represent the soul of this company. He's forgotten that. I haven't." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She wasn't alone. She had an ally, a powerful one. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "Let's do it. Let's take the jet." The night of the Innovators' Gala, the penthouse was transformed into a parody of sophistication. Ice sculptures dripped onto priceless rugs, a string quartet soared away in a corner, drowned out by the braying laughter of Connor's guests, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and ambition. Lauren watched the proceedings from the doorway of their master suite, a silent observer in her own home. She had claimed a sudden debilitating migraine, an excuse Connor accepted with transparent relief. Her ordinary presence would have only diluted the high-gloss finish of his perfect evening. He was in his element, a champagne flute in one hand, the other gesturing expansively as he held court. Katrina Beaumont was glued to his side, her red dress a slash of crimson against the sea of black tuxedos. They looked like a king and his consort surveying their court. The sight no longer pained Lauren. It fueled her. At 9:45 p.m., she received a text. A single word from a number she didn't recognize. Now. It was the signal from Daniel. Her bag was already packed. It was a simple leather duffel, the one she'd used for weekend trips in their old life. Inside, there was no designer clothing or jewelry. She had packed 3 changes of simple, comfortable clothes, a copy of her favorite book, East of Eden, the framed ultrasound photo, and a small, worn-out photo album. The album was filled with pictures of her and Connor from before. Before the money, before the penthouse, before the hollowness had taken root in his eyes. It was her evidence, her reminder of what was real. Lastly, she packed the old discarded phone of Connor's, the one with Daniel's number. It felt like a crucial piece of the puzzle. She took one last look around the opulent bedroom. The cavernous walk-in closet was filled with clothes and shoes he'd bought for her, all of them beautiful, all of them feeling like a costume. She left them all behind. She walked over to the jewelry box on her dresser, a gift from him. Inside, nestled amongst diamonds and platinum, was the simple silver locket he had given her on their first anniversary. She opened it. On one side was a picture of them laughing on a park bench. On the other side, an inscription, "My anchor." She closed the locket, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't take it with her. She left it open on the pillow of his perfectly made bed. A final silent message. You cut the rope. Slipping out was easier than she'd imagined. The service elevator was deserted, the staff all busy catering to the gala. The cool night air hit her as she exited through a discreet side door, a welcome shock after the stifling atmosphere upstairs. A black sedan with tinted windows was waiting at the curb exactly as Daniel had described. The driver, a large man with a calm, professional demeanor, simply nodded as she approached, taking her bag and opening the door for her. He didn't ask her name. To the executive airport, ma'am, he said, his voice a low rumble. The drive was a blur of neon and shadows. Lauren's mind raced. What if Connor noticed she was gone? What if someone saw her? What if this was all a terrible mistake? She clutched the ultrasound photo through the canvas of her bag, the image of her child, a talisman against her fear. They bypassed the main terminal, pulling up to the discreet entrance of the private hangars. And there it was, the Gulfstream G650. The Nexus. It gleamed under the floodlights, a potent symbol of everything she was leaving behind, and simultaneously her chariot of liberation. The engines were already whining a low hum of power that vibrated through the soles of her feet. The sedan door opened, and Daniel Cole was there. Dressed in dark, practical travel clothes, he looked calm and resolute. He offered her a hand to help her out of the car. You made it, he said, his smile reassuring. Ready? As I'll ever be, she replied, her voice shaky. He led her up the short flight of stairs into the jet's cabin. The interior was Connor's design, all cream leather, polished chrome, and dark mahogany. It was the pinnacle of sterile luxury. A flight attendant, a woman with a professional, unquestioning smile, offered her a drink. Lauren asked for water. The pilot has filed our flight plan for Portland, Daniel said, settling into the seat across from her. It's logged as an emergency consultation with our West Coast server infrastructure team. Plausible and incredibly boring. No one will question it tonight. Just as Lauren began to feel a sliver of safety, a wave of relief, Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and the color drained from his face. What is it? Lauren asked, her stomach lurching. It's a text from Connor's assistant, he said, his voice tight. She says Connor wants the jet ready. He's planning an impromptu trip to Vegas with a few guests after the party. He's on his way here. Now. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Lauren. He was coming. Of course he was. His perfect night, his perfect plan for a celebratory jaunt to Vegas. She was about to ruin it. He would find them. He would find her. What do we do? She whispered, her eyes wide with terror. He'll see me. It's over. Daniel's face was a mask of intense concentration. He looked out the window toward the gate that led to the tarmac. Then he looked at the pilot who was visible in the cockpit, going through the final pre-flight checks. He made a decision. It's not over, he said, his voice regaining its command. He pressed the intercom button. Captain, this is Mr. Cole. We have a change of plans. The situation is more critical than we thought. We need to take off immediately. I am invoking executive priority. "Acknowledge." A calm voice crackled back. "Acknowledged, Mr. Cole. Commencing final preparations for immediate departure." Daniel turned back to Lauren. "Buckle up." Tightly. He was on his phone typing a rapid-fire message. "I'm messaging the head of airport security, a man who owes me a favor. I'm telling him Connor Reeves's access card has been flagged for a potential security breach and to deny him tarmac access until it's cleared by me personally. It'll buy us a few minutes." The jet began to move, taxiing away from the hangar with a smooth, powerful surge. Lauren gripped her armrests, her knuckles white. She stared out the window, her heart in her throat. And then she saw it. A black Escalade Connor's car, speeding toward the gate. It screeched to a halt. The door was flung open, and Connor stormed out, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He was shouting at the security guard at the gate, stabbing a finger toward their departing plane. Even from a distance, she could see his rage. The guard stood firm, shaking his head, holding up a hand. Connor was being denied, blocked from his own kingdom. The jet swung onto the main runway. The pitch of the engines rose to a deafening roar. Lauren felt a tremendous force push her back into the plush leather seat as the plane accelerated. Faster and faster the runway lights, streaking past into a blur of white and blue. And then, with a feeling of impossible lightness, they were airborne. The plane banked sharply, and Lauren looked down. She could see the entire city spread out below her, a carpet of diamonds. She could see the flashing lights of the Escalade at the gate of the airfield. She could see the tiny, furious figure of her husband growing smaller and smaller, until he was just another insignificant speck in the glittering metropolis he so desperately wanted to own. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow or fear anymore. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. She was out. She was free. She looked across at Daniel, who was watching her with a quiet, steady gaze. He gave her a small, solemn nod. They flew on in silence, climbing higher and higher, leaving the life that was no longer hers far below. Lauren leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, her hand resting on her belly. For the first time in a long time, she felt a profound sense of peace. She wasn't just escaping. She was ascending. Connor Reeves stood on the tarmac, a solitary figure, dwarfed by the cavernous expanse of the private airfield. The sound of the Gulfstream's engines, a roar he had always associated with his own ascent, now felt like a personal mockery. Each decibel was a note in a symphony of betrayal, a thunderous announcement of his own staggering ineptitude. He watched the navigation lights of his jet blink once, twice, before being swallowed by the vast, indifferent blackness of the Texas sky. Gone. For a full, breathless minute, he was paralyzed by a disbelief so profound it felt like a physical impact winding him. The security guard, a man named George, whose family's Christmas card was probably on his assistant's desk, was stammering about a security flag and CEO priority protocol. The words were meaningless static. The reality was a clean, sharp, impossible truth, Lauren. His quiet, predictable, ordinary Lauren had just hijacked his life's most potent symbol and vanished. And she hadn't acted alone. The text from his assistant, which he now read for the 10th time, burned on his screen. Mr. Cole boarded the Nexus 10 minutes ago with an unidentified female guest. Destination, Portland. Daniel Cole, his loyal, plodding CEO. The man he'd hired to handle the boring minutiae so he could focus on the grand vision. The betrayal wasn't just audacious. It was illogical, a tear in the fabric of the world he had so meticulously constructed. The rage, when it finally broke through the shock, was not hot and explosive, but a glacial, terrifyingly clear fury. This was not a domestic squabble. This was a declaration of war. He stormed back to the escalade, leaving the babbling guard behind. He jabbed at his phone, his fingers trembling with a rage that demanded an outlet. "Get Pike on the line!" Now he barked at his assistant through the car's speakerphone. The connection was made instantly. "Connor, what's going on?" The party is over," Connor snarled. "Pike, listen to me very carefully. My wife and Daniel Cole have stolen my jet." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Jeffrey Pike, a lawyer who dealt in hostile takeovers and patent litigation, was not accustomed to calls about stolen jets. Connor slowed down. "Stolen is a legally specific term. Daniel is the CEO. He has operational authority to command corporate assets. Don't you dare quote bylaws at me, Jeffrey," Connor roared, the sound echoing in the leather-lined interior of the car. "He took my wife, who is in the process of leaving me on my plane in the middle of the night under false pretenses. That is theft, that is kidnapping. I want them arrested. I want the FAA to ground that plane. I want his career reduced to a smoking crater before he even touches down." "And what do we tell the FAA, Connor?" Pike's voice was calm. A maddening counterpoint to Connor's frenzy. "That your CEO and your wife are flying to Portland. They'll ask if a crime has been committed. If you say yes, you'll be admitting to the world that you have zero control over your own C-suite. The story will be that the founder of Nexus Pay is so erratic, his own CEO had to spirit his wife to safety. The stock will open in a freefall. Is that the outcome you want?" Pike's logic was infuriating and impeccable. He was right. Daniel had built a cage of plausible deniability. To accuse him publicly was to immolate himself. The walls of his world, which had seemed so high and impenetrable, now felt like they were shrinking, pressing in on him. When he burst back into the penthouse, the dissonance was jarring. The string quartet was playing something light and forgettable, and the air was cloying with the scent of lilies and champagne. Katrina, a vision in crimson, glided toward him, her smile bright with manufactured delight. "Connor, darling, we were about to mutiny. A few of us are packed and ready for round 2 in Vegas." He looked past her at the sea of smiling, vacuous faces, the venture capitalists, the influencers, the social climbers. They were parasites, and he had willingly invited them to feed on him. His gaze was cold reptilian. "The trip's off," he snapped, his voice a low command that sliced through the chatter. "Everyone needs to leave. The party is over. Now." The effect was instantaneous. Laughter died in throats. The music faltered into a discordant scrape. Anxious glances were exchanged. Within 15 minutes, the penthouse was empty. A battlefield of abandoned glasses and crushed canapes. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. It was in this tomb-like quiet, wandering through the wreckage of his perfect evening, that he walked into the master suite. There, on the vast, empty expanse of his perfectly made bed, sat the open silver locket. He picked it up. The tiny picture of them, young and laughing, seemed to mock him from a forgotten era. And the inscription, "My anchor," felt less like a memory and more like a diagnosis. An anchor is what holds you in place. He had wanted to soar untethered. He had cut the rope himself. The flicker of self-awareness was agonizing a glimpse into an abyss of his own making. He quickly smothered it, transmuting the pain back into pure, cleansing rage. She would pay for this. They both would. At 3 a.m., sitting alone in his glass-walled office, overlooking the sleeping city, he drafted the email. It was a masterpiece of corporate brutality, announcing Daniel Cole's immediate termination for gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and theft of assets. He sent it to the entire board of directors, a digital guillotine he was certain would end the rebellion. Then he sat back and waited for the affirmations of loyalty to pour in. Thousands of miles away, the Gulfstream's wheels touched down on a private mist-shrouded runway on the Oregon coast. The moment the cabin door opened, Lauren was met not with the recycled air of her gilded cage, but with a cool, cleansing breeze that smelled of salt pine and damp earth. It was the smell of life, and she inhaled it like a drowning woman taking her first breath. A discreet sedan drove them to a house nestled in a secluded cove. It wasn't a monument to wealth like the penthouse. It was a home, a structure of warm cedar and vast panes of glass that didn't seek to dominate the landscape, but to become a part of it. Inside, a fire was already crackling in a stone hearth. "This is beautiful," Lauren breathed, running a hand along a worn wooden mantelpiece. "It's my sanctuary," Daniel said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "My grandparents built a small cabin on this land. I replaced it with this, but I tried to keep the feeling." "You're safe here, Lauren, completely off the grid." That first night, after Daniel showed her to a guest room with a window that looked directly out onto the churning Pacific, Lauren unpacked her small duffel bag. She placed the ultrasound photo on the bedside table. Then she took out the worn photo album and sat on the edge of the bed. She slowly turned the pages, looking at the images of the boy she'd loved, the boy with the goofy grin and the patched-up sneakers, the boy who had held her hand at her father's funeral, the boy who had whispered his dreams to her in the dark. It wasn't an act of mourning. It was an act of arming herself. This was her proof. This was her truth. For the first time in months, she slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the sound of the ocean, a steady, protective lullaby. The next morning, Daniel was already at work, his laptop open on a large oak table. He looked up as she entered. Connor made his move. He said, his tone grimly satisfied. "He tried to fire me via a 3 a.m. email to the board." "Can he do that?" Lauren asked, her heart sinking. "He could, if he were dealing with an amateur," Daniel replied. "But my employment contract has a poison pill clause against summary termination. The board is legally obligated to launch a formal investigation, and they're spooked. They've called an emergency meeting for Friday." He slid his laptop around. "This is what I've been preparing." It was a dossier, a meticulously compiled file detailing Connor's increasingly erratic behavior, the reckless spending, the vanity projects, and now this unhinged reaction. Daniel was not just defending himself, he was building an unassailable case for a change in leadership. Later that day, Lauren met Audrey Kane. The attorney arrived not in a flashy car, but a practical Subaru, her demeanor all business. She sat with Lauren at the oak table, the fire crackling beside them, and listened to the entire story. When Lauren slid the separation agreement from Connor's lawyer across the table, Audrey scanned it, her lips tightening into a thin line. "This," she said, tossing the papers aside as if they were contaminated, "is an intimidation tactic, not a legal document. It's a classic move by a bully. He thinks because he has more money, he has more power. In my courtroom, Ms. Bishop, facts have power. and we are going to arm you with an arsenal of them." For 2 hours, Audrey laid out the strategy. It wasn't just about divorce and custody. "We will argue that your intellectual and emotional labor was a foundational component of Nexus Pay's success. The user interface you designed, the business plans you proofread. That wasn't a wife helping out. That was sweat equity. You weren't just his anchor, you were his partner. He will not be divorcing a homemaker. He will be separating from an uncredited co-founder, and we will demand a settlement that reflects that truth." Lauren felt a shift inside her. The last vestiges of the victim she had felt herself to be were burning away in the fire of Audrey Kane's righteous conviction. She was not a woman who had been left. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she was about to fight back. The emergency board meeting took place via secure video conference on Friday. Connor appeared from his penthouse office, framed by the Austin skyline, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of controlled fury. Daniel was in the Nexus Pay headquarters, calm and composed. One by one, the faces of the board members blinked into existence, a gallery of serious, worried expressions. Connor launched into his tirade, his voice dripping with venom. He spoke of loyalty and treason, of Daniel's manipulative influence on his emotionally fragile wife. He painted a picture of a corporate coup born from a domestic dispute, a narrative designed to make the board feel they were choosing between their founder and a meddling subordinate. When he finished, an uncomfortable silence filled the virtual room. Then Daniel spoke, his voice calm and measured. He didn't rebut the accusations directly. Instead, he shared his screen, presenting a slide deck filled with facts and figures, the disastrous ROI on the vanity projects, the stock analysts' concerns over Connor's recent public statements, the internal polling showing a decline in employee morale. He was dispassionately dissecting Connor's leadership brick by brick. "This isn't about a personal matter," Daniel concluded. "This is about a pattern of erratic behavior and fiscal irresponsibility that poses an existential threat to this company. My actions were an extreme measure to protect shareholder value and corporate stability." Then Robert Chen, the lead director, cleared his throat. "We have one other party who has requested to speak." A new window popped into the conference. Lauren. She was not where Connor expected her to be. Not in a hotel room or some anonymous apartment. She was in a warm, light-filled room, a roaring fire visible behind her. She looked serene, healthy, and unshakably calm. Connor's composure finally cracked. The sight of her so clearly thriving outside of his orbit was an unbearable insult. "What is this?" he sputtered. "She has no place here." Lauren looked directly into the camera, her gaze finding Connor's on the screen. She saw the rage, the confusion, the crumbling facade of the Titan. She felt no pity. She felt only a quiet, resolute strength. "Connor," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "You told me I was too ordinary for your new life. You tried to erase me from our shared history and from our child's future." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on the silent board members. "You underestimated me. And you underestimated the soul of the company you built. It was never just about you." Her presence, her composure, her quiet power did more damage than any shouting match could have. She wasn't the unstable woman he'd described. She was the picture of rational grace. In that moment, the board saw the truth. The chaos, the instability, the liability. It all originated from one source, their founder. The fallout was swift and bloodless. The board voted unanimously to invoke a key person clause for an incapacitated executive. Connor Reeves was transitioned to the newly created non-operational role of founder and chief visionary. He kept his fortune, but was stripped of all authority. Daniel Cole was named chairman of the board, cementing his control. Connor sat in his glass box, stunned into silence, a king in a castle with no power, listening as the drawbridge was pulled up and he was locked inside. Audrey Kane's settlement was a masterpiece. Lauren received a share of assets that reflected her foundational role in the company, ensuring her and her child's future. More importantly, she was granted sole legal and physical custody. The king could have his kingdom. She had her child. 6 months later, the Oregon house was hers, purchased from Daniel. She sat in a rocking chair in a nursery, filled with the scent of lavender and baby powder. In her arms, she held her daughter asleep on her chest. She had named her Hope. She looked out the window at the vast, wild ocean, a view that once represented a desperate escape, but was now the backdrop to her peace. She had been deemed ordinary, a footnote in a great man's story. But she had learned that true strength was not in the noise you make, but in the quiet, unyielding conviction of your own worth. She had written her own ending, and it was more extraordinary than any life Connor could have ever imagined. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the jet, or the corporate power play. It was about a woman reclaiming her story. Lauren proved that being ordinary, being grounded, being loyal, being decent isn't a weakness. It's a superpower, especially in a world that has lost its way. She didn't just escape a bad marriage. She orchestrated a revolution, saving not only herself and her child, but the soul of a company. Her story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's valuation. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power, waiting for the right moment to change the world. What did you think of Lauren's incredible story of courage and clever revenge? Let us know in the comments below. Do you believe that walls can talk? That sometimes the very bricks around us hold stories too raw, too tangled to speak aloud? This is the story of a man who shattered hearts and trust in one swift stroke, erasing his unborn baby's name from the nursery wall. Little did he know that fate would carve that same name into the towering facade of his company's newest building. Love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption twist through every corridor of this tale. Buckle in for a journey that delves into hidden pasts and uncertain futures, where every character holds a key to a devastating secret. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Alexander Haven's corner office at Horizon Global Ventures. The golden light cast a halo on the gleaming awards and plaques that lined the walls, each one echoing the success that the Haven family had worked generations to achieve. Alexander, a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked hair at just 38, leaned back in his leather chair, drumming his fingers on the polished mahogany desk. His gaze cold and distant, fixed on an ornate pen, an anniversary gift from his wife, Cassandra. In that moment, the pen symbolized everything that had once been simple and hopeful in his life. Now it only served as a reminder of secrets he had kept, the people he had hurt. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every variable in his life. But as the afternoon light drifted across the office, he realized control had slipped through his fingers the very day he found out Cassandra was pregnant. They had never spoken much about children before. Sure, there were the passing fantasies of a large family, or a small one, depending on the day, but their careers always took center stage. Cassandra was a brilliant architect who had designed luxury estates from London to Bali. It was her passion, her calling. She had come from a humble background, and each building she created was a testament to how far she'd climbed. Alexander's phone buzzed. The name on the caller ID read Cassandra, and he felt a rush of guilt swirl inside him. She'd called 5 times that day, and each call had gone to voicemail. Now, perhaps out of reflex, he answered. Cassandra's voice was tight. She used his pet name, though the warmth that usually accompanied it was missing. "We need to talk. I'm at the house." Alexander swallowed. "I'll be there soon." He left the office without a backward glance, ignoring the stares of his employees as he stalked past glass-walled conference rooms. He drove to their estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling piece of land overshadowed by centuries-old oaks. The driveway alone was half a mile of winding pavement lined with perfectly manicured hedges. When he finally stepped inside, an uneasy silence welcomed him. Years ago, upon first acquiring the property, he and Cassandra had dreamed of filling those halls with laughter. Children's voices, dinner parties, new memories. They even had a room at the end of the upstairs corridor, designated as a nursery, its walls once adorned with gentle pastel colors. A rocking chair Cassandra's grandmother had passed down, and a small name plaque they'd chosen for their soon-to-be child, the child who would never come. He found Cassandra in the nursery. The walls were now blank, the rocking chair shoved into a corner. She stood with her back to him, arms crossed, shoulders trembling. "What have you done?" Her voice was steady, yet thick with pain. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. He had instructed the staff to repaint the nursery and remove all traces of the name they had once agreed upon Adrian. It had been a reckless, impulsive decision, one made out of heartbreak and the fear of being haunted by a memory of what could have been. Losing the baby had hit him in a place he never knew existed, so he did the one thing that made sense at the time: erase everything that reminded him of it. Cassandra turned, revealing tears clinging to her lashes. "We never even talked about it," she whispered. "You just had them remove his name, like he never existed." "I couldn't stand it," Alexander said, his voice low. "Couldn't stand walking by this room and seeing that name every day. It hurt too much." She stared at him, eyes glassy with betrayal. "Hurt too much? For whom? For you?" She took a trembling breath. "Because I still dream of him at night. I wake up and forget he's gone. And now there's nothing left of him at all, except the emptiness." His throat burned. He wanted to hold her, to promise her it would be okay. But the chasm between them felt too wide. Cassandra brushed past him, leaving only the scent of her expensive perfume and heartbreak in the air. He stood in the barren nursery, haunted by the absence of the name that used to be there. He thought about how that single act of painting over a memory had torn him and Cassandra further apart, and he wondered if they would ever find their way back. Yet destiny had other plans. The name he'd buried was about to resurface in a place he'd never expect, etched in stone on the facade of a building that would soon reshape both their lives. Long before he met Cassandra, Alexander Haven was raised in a world of opulence. The Havens were a known name in Massachusetts, their family wealth tracing back to old shipping lines that made fortunes in the 19th century. Over time, their empire evolved into real estate investment banking and eventually high-tech ventures. Alexander's father, Gordon Haven, was a formidable presence, meticulous, shrewd, and intimidating. He had raised Alexander with the mantra, legacy. First everything else, second. While this instilled in Alexander a relentless drive for success, it also planted deep insecurities. He had grown to view relationships as stepping stones or potential pitfalls. Even in personal matters, he measured the risk and potential reward. Growing up, he rarely visited friends' homes, almost never had a slumber party or carefree evening away from the watchful eyes of his father and their entourage of staff. He was groomed for leadership, taught to win at any cost. Cassandra Delgado was nothing like the women in Alexander's social circle. A self-made prodigy, her architectural breakthroughs in eco-friendly designs caught the attention of environmentalists, real estate moguls, and philanthropists alike, including Bill and Melinda Gates, who admired her commitment to sustainability. Some whispered that she was on the short list to design a new philanthropic research center that Mark Zuckerberg was rumored to be funding. No one dared question her brilliance. She had an almost mystical ability to see aesthetics and engineering as two halves of the same whole. They met at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital in Boston. Cassandra was there to pitch a new pediatric ward design concept, one that would integrate nature-inspired spaces to comfort children during treatments. Alexander, ironically, was there to represent the Haven family's charitable giving, something that always gave them positive publicity, though the real philanthropic intentions were sometimes overshadowed by the press releases. Their connection was instant, and it went beyond physical attraction. Alexander, drawn to her fiery determination, found himself opening up in ways he never had. Cassandra, for her part, saw in him a man who yearned for genuine passion outside his business fortress. They talked about innovative building designs, philanthropic aspirations, and the ways architecture could shape a better future. Where Alexander was methodical, Cassandra was creative. Where he built walls, she tore them down. They married quickly, too quickly, some said, and formed what Boston's high society regarded as the power couple of the decade. At first, Alexander integrated Cassandra into the Haven empire, seamlessly trusting her insight to innovate in areas where the family's vision had grown stale. In turn, she reveled in the resources the Haven family's wealth provided, designing experimental complexes, advanced living facilities, and eco-conscious high-rises. Yet as the months wore on, Alexander's father Gordon began to question Cassandra's long-term loyalty. She wasn't from their world. Old money had a certain set of unspoken rules, and Cassandra wasn't one to follow them blindly. Over time, tensions rose. Cassandra refused to let the Haven name overshadow her personal identity. She pressed for her own brand recognition in architectural circles, which Gordon felt threatened the collective family prestige. Alexander stood uncomfortably between his father and his wife, often appeasing one at the expense of the other. Then came the pregnancy. For a moment, everything looked bright. Both Alexander and Cassandra believed that introducing a new life into their family might unify them in a deeper way. Gordon, too, softened at the idea of a grandchild to continue the Haven line. The baby would be named Adrian, after Cassandra's beloved grandfather, who had encouraged her to pursue architecture before he passed. The pregnancy also aligned with a major business venture. Alexander was spearheading an enormous real estate project in downtown Boston. He'd collaborated with City Hall to turn a derelict block into a modern corporate park, one that would bear the Haven name and stand as a testament to the family's ongoing influence. But fate was cruel. Complications led to a tragic miscarriage. Cassandra spiraled into grief, and Alexander retreated behind his stoic walls, shutting out his own pain. It was easier for him to bury it beneath new projects, negotiations, and deals than to face the magnitude of what they lost. And so the nursery remained untouched, a silent reminder, until the day he decided to erase Adrian's name from its walls. The heartbreak in Cassandra's eyes that afternoon was not something that could be easily fixed. Their once tightly woven tapestry of ambition and love was unraveling. Little did either of them know just how violently the threads would be pulled apart by events lurking on the horizon. Time marched on. Work never stopped at Horizon Global Ventures. The real estate project that Alexander had been orchestrating, officially dubbed the Haven Complex, was inching closer to its grand unveiling. This multi-building campus promised to revitalize downtown Boston, merging state-of-the-art office spaces with green rooftops, large communal parks, and advanced energy-efficient technologies. Cassandra had contributed some early design concepts before her grief took her away from many responsibilities, and Alexander had allowed her that distance, not wanting to impose further stress. One crisp morning, Alexander's mind was spinning through a dozen tasks as he stepped out of his black SUV in front of the nearly completed Haven complex. He was there to do a final walkthrough before the massive media event scheduled 2 weeks later. Broad columns flanked an enormous plaza in the center of the development, lined with glass-clad towers that reached skyward. The sweet tang of fresh cement and the buzz of construction filled the air. His team of architects and investors trailed behind him, bustling with excitement to show off the progress. Alexander nodded politely, scanning the site with a practiced gaze. They crossed the plaza and approached the main tower, which soared upwards in shimmering glass and steel. A large ceremonial wall next to the entrance was reserved for a special unveiling, an inscription dedicated to the vision and future of the Haven legacy. Rumor had it that Alexander intended to carve a quote or place an emblem to commemorate the family's dedication to progress. Just as they were about to enter the tower, the site manager Miriam Kelly hurried up to Alexander with an odd look on her face. "Mr. Haven," she said, pushing her black-rimmed glasses up her nose. "We've discovered something on the decorative facade. It wasn't part of the official design, but it appears to be etched deep into the stone. It will take significant effort and time to remove." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Etched like graffiti?" "Not exactly. It's a name, sir." She paused, swallowing hard. "Adrian." In an instant, Alexander's heart dropped. He stiffened. The mere mention of that name here in the heart of his largest development felt like a cosmic punch to the gut. "How did it get there?" he demanded, voice taut. "We're still investigating," she replied, voice hushed. "It's small, but it's chiseled in a way that's deliberate, with actual stone carving techniques. Not just some random tagger with a spray can. It's on a corner of the decorative stone panel just to the right of the building's main entrance. We can remove it, but it will leave a visible patch unless we replace the entire panel, which might take weeks to reorder and install." A swirl of memories and guilt flooded Alexander. He could still see Cassandra's tear-stained eyes the day he repainted the nursery walls. Why here, why now? Was this some act of sabotage, or was it a bizarre coincidence? He turned to his team, feigning control. "Gather the crew. Let's see this for ourselves." They walked around to the side of the building near the main entrance. Indeed, on the lower corner of a heavy stone block, in ornate script no more than 3 inches tall, he saw the name Adrian. It glinted in the morning light, as if mocking him. The cut was smooth, professionally done. Alexander felt as though the ghost of his child had found a way to appear at the very heart of his business empire. The crowd of engineers and project managers murmured, but none dared speak the name aloud again. Everyone felt the tension rippling from Alexander. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Get the best stonemason to see if it can be carefully removed without replacing the entire block," he said, scanning their faces. "And I want a full investigation. Check security footage, see who came through here. This is private property. There must be cameras." Miriam nodded. "Yes, Mr. Haven." As the group filed away, Alexander stared at the etched name. Questions churned in his mind. Was someone trying to torment him? Or was it Cassandra, grappling with the memory of Adrian in her own anguished way? He knew she was a talented designer, but stone carving was not her skill set. Still, doubt flickered. He traced the letters with his fingertips, fighting the tightness in his chest. Adrian. A child who never got a chance at life, but who somehow kept reappearing. No matter how hard he tried to erase the name, it found its way back. The day after discovering the name on the building, Alexander hardly slept. Anxiety wrapped around him like a vice fueled by a new wave of tension at home. Cassandra, though physically present at their estate, felt emotionally distant. She had withdrawn to her personal design studio behind the house, offering no explanation for her absences or solitary nights. At the office, Alexander was met with an undercurrent of gossip. Employees whispered in hallways, exchanging glances when he passed. He knew they suspected something, that the etched name must hold personal significance. The Haven Empire might have soared on the wings of success, but it also flew through corridors built on secrets and half-truths. Desperate for answers, Alexander plunged himself into the security footage from the site. Along with Miriam and a small group of trusted IT specialists, he spent hours scrubbing through camera angles. They found little out of the ordinary, no suspicious intruders, no after-hours trespassers. The building's exterior cameras had either not been angled to that specific patch of stone or were obscured by scaffolding. It was possible that someone had hidden in a blind spot, but a near-total blank didn't satisfy him. He was certain there had to be more. Someone must have had both motive and access. Then a glitch on one camera's timestamp caught his eye. A short segment, no more than 15 minutes, was missing from the official logs. He turned to the IT specialist, a wiry young man named Conrad. "You see this?" Alexander said, pointing to the gap. "We're missing footage between 2:30 and 2:45 a.m. last Tuesday." Conrad tapped on his keyboard, sweat forming at his temples. "It looks like a forced corruption in the data. Someone with advanced knowledge of our systems might have done this deliberately." Alexander's fury rose. He felt his hands clench into fists. "We pay for state-of-the-art security, yet here we are. I want a list of everyone who had access to these cameras that night." Conrad nodded. "Of course, Mr. Haven." As the day wore on, a handful of potential suspects emerged: employees, contractors, or external tech consultants who had the clearance to handle or manipulate the security feeds. But none stood out as having a personal vendetta to carve Adrian into the building's facade. As far as Alexander knew, that name and its significance were known only to family and a few close friends. Just before evening, he slipped away from the office to pay an unannounced visit to Cassandra's personal design studio. It was a minimalist glass annex behind their main residence, filled with sprawling drafting tables, half-finished models, and large windows overlooking a secluded garden. He found her hunched over a blueprint, wearing a plain black turtleneck and leggings. She barely acknowledged him when he stepped inside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. The tension between them was suffocating, but anger wouldn't help. She shrugged, maintaining focus on the blueprint. About what? He took a step closer. The name etched on the new building. Adrian. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? She stood up slowly, her eyes narrowed in astonishment. What makes you think I would do that? Alexander exhaled. I'm not accusing you of anything, but you've been distant, and I know how important Adrian's memory is to you. This could be some act of grief. She paced across the studio, frustration evident. So because I'm grieving, I'd break into your construction site in the dead of night and carve our baby's name on stone. Is that really what you think of me, Alexander? He winced at the use of his full name. I just need answers. Cassandra's eyes brimmed with tears. I can't even stand looking at that building. It reminds me of what you did to the nursery, wiping away Adrian's name like he never existed. I'm not stepping foot near your precious Haven complex, let alone defacing it. Alexander stared at the floor. Guilt and suspicion clashed in his chest. He wanted to believe her. Over the years, she'd proven herself to be honorable and true, even if they were drifting apart. She picked up a small clay model she was working on, a conceptual piece for a pediatric clinic in Honduras. This is how I honor Adrian, she said softly, tapping the model. By designing places that help children. Because that was our dream, wasn't it? To do something meaningful for families. That dream died a little the day you repainted that room. Stung. Alexander nodded, unable to muster a response. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. If you remember anything that might help, or if you see anything suspicious, you'll tell me. She nodded, though her expression made it clear she believed if Alexander really cared about her, he'd know how deeply he'd wounded her. He left the studio feeling colder than when he'd arrived. Over the next week, Alexander's frustrations mounted. His father Gordon, who had been conspicuously absent for months, supposedly overseas on business, unexpectedly returned. Gordon always had a knack for appearing at the worst possible time. One evening, he summoned Alexander to the Old Haven mansion in Beacon Hill, the historic family seat that Alexander had avoided since his childhood. Alexander arrived to find Gordon waiting in the study, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and antique furniture that smelled like old leather. 2 crystal glasses of expensive cognac sat on the table untouched. Son Gordon said, his deep voice echoing. I've been hearing rumors. Something about the name Adrian carved into your new building. Care to explain? Alexander's jaw clenched. He'd never told his father the baby's name. That was a conversation he and Cassandra had reserved for themselves, at least until the time was right. But perhaps gossip traveled faster than respect for privacy in Boston's elite circles. Nothing to explain, Alexander replied, forcing calm. It's vandalism, and I'm handling it. Gordon's expression was measured. I understand losing a child is hard, but you need to keep your head in the game. The city is watching, the press is circling. You're set to be the face of this grand opening. Anything that smells of scandal or strife will tarnish the Haven name. Alexander's shoulders tensed. Is that all you care about? The name not once have you asked how Cassandra or I are coping. Gordon's straightened lips pressed into a thin line. Grief is personal. I'm not your therapist, but I do know the family legacy must remain intact. If you can't manage to keep it that way, I will step in. The threat lingered in the room like a noxious gas. Alexander took a long sip of the cognac, letting the burn steady his nerves. He was used to his father's cold approach to family matters. Showing vulnerability in front of Gordon was akin to bleeding in shark-infested waters. "That won't be necessary," Alexander said, determined. "I've got it under control." Gordon nodded, but the glint in his eyes said otherwise. "I trust you'll do what must be done." Their conversation ended abruptly. Alexander left, feeling the old mansion's oppressive weight crushing him. He hated that place. It reminded him of lonely childhood nights locked away in a stiff bedroom, while tutors and nannies drilled into him that everything was about legacy and image. Back at the estate, he found Cassandra's design studio empty. A quick text revealed she had gone to New York for a last-minute architecture symposium. In the past, she would have told him about any travel plans. He knew she was pulling away, forging her independence again, and it both frightened and angered him. Days marched on with no new leads about the carved name. The IT team found no conclusive evidence, and the stonemasons insisted it would cost tens of thousands of dollars to fix the etched stone, and that was assuming the project schedule could accommodate such a significant delay. With the grand opening fast approaching, Alexander faced a choice: reveal the name at the event, and risk a media circus, or patch it in a rushed manner, leaving an obvious scar on what was meant to be a pristine facade. He tried to push it from his mind by immersing himself in finalizing the details of the opening ceremony. He'd invited a roster of high-profile personalities, local politicians, celebrities, and philanthropic figures, even hoping to secure a cameo from Warren Buffett, who was rumored to be investing in a sustainable housing initiative. The event in many ways was a tribute to the Haven Empire's commitment to the future. Yet as the big day loomed, Alexander couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the name Adrian was more than a mere vandalism or cosmic coincidence. It felt like a reckoning for the callous way he had tried to paint over the nursery, to bury the sorrow too quickly. At last, the morning of the grand opening arrived. A crisp autumn breeze whipped through downtown Boston, sending leaves swirling around the newly laid plaza. Technicians bustled, finalizing the stage and sound systems. Towering banners bearing the Haven family crest fluttered from newly installed flagpoles. Alexander had spent the previous night practicing his speech in front of a mirror. He stood now backstage, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Journalists with cameras angled for the best shot. Officials from City Hall mingled, and a small band rehearsed soft classical tunes. Despite the outward pomp, his mind was a tempest. He glanced at his phone, hoping to see a text from Cassandra, but there was nothing. She was back in Boston, but had not confirmed her attendance. He drew a slow breath, stepping onto the stage, as the announcer introduced him with a flourish. His speech began smoothly enough, praising Boston's heritage, the dedication of the City Council, the employees of Horizon Global Ventures, and the bright future symbolized by the Haven complex. He had a practiced way with words, honed by years of press conferences and philanthropic galas. Then his eyes caught a glimpse of someone unexpected in the crowd: Cassandra. She stood at the back, arms folded, her expression unreadable. For a moment his voice faltered, but he forged ahead. Applause peppered his speech. Lights flashed, cameras rolled. He concluded with a statement on legacy, how the Haven family strived to build not just buildings, but also hope for the next generation. The audience clapped politely. Alexander turned, motioning toward the large drape that covered the ceremonial inscription on the wall near the building's main entrance. As the drape fell away, it revealed the words, "For innovation, for progress, for the future." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the stone just beneath still carried the small yet haunting name, Adrian, now partially obscured by a subtle attempt at patchwork. The name remained legible up close, and soon curious murmurs rippled through the attendees. The tension in Alexander's stomach coiled. He stepped down from the podium, greeting officials and exchanging forced smiles. Media swarmed, some noticing the strange etching on the stone. He braced for the questions, though he prayed none would come. Yet they did. "Mr. Haven, can you comment on the name etched beneath your new inscription?" Alexander stiffened, but forced a measured smile. "We had a minor issue with vandalism. It's already being addressed." Before more questions could swarm, an older man approached someone Alexander recognized from his father's entourage, Charles Deering, a retired advisor who had served the Haven family for decades. His grey eyes flickered with concern. "We should speak privately," Charles said, guiding Alexander away from the crowd. They slipped into a side passage of the building's lobby. Smooth marble floors reflected the overhead lights. Charles wasted no time. "I believe I have information about who might have carved that name," he said. "I didn't speak sooner because I wasn't entirely sure, but new evidence came to my attention." Alexander's pulse quickened. "Go on." Charles fished an envelope from inside his coat. "Someone sent me still images from a CCTV feed, dated the night the carving must have happened. However, they're from an external camera across the street, not your official site cameras." Alexander took the envelope and peered at the black and white stills. The images showed a figure in a hooded jacket near the building's entrance. The figure stooped in the exact spot where the name was later found. Despite the angle and darkness, it was clearly not Cassandra. The person appeared stockier, with broader shoulders. He flipped through more images. One partial side view, though grainy, made his chest tighten. The face was partially visible, just enough to recognize him as Elias Ward, a childhood friend of Alexander's who had once worked at Horizon Global Ventures, but left under tense circumstances. Elias's family had once been in business with the Havens, but a few years back, Elias had been ousted amid a scandal that implicated him in a questionable real estate deal. Alexander hadn't spoken to him since. He looked up at Charles. "Elias. Why would he do this?" Charles frowned. "He's harbored resentment for a long time. It's possible he knew about your baby's name. He might have learned it from staff or overheard it from your father's lips." Shaken, Alexander clutched the photos. It made sense in a twisted way. Elias was cunning, and if he wanted to strike at Alexander's psyche, carving Adrian into the building was a cruel but potent way to do it. "But how did he manage to force a corruption in our security footage?" Alexander asked. "He's an IT expert, or at least he has connections," Charles replied. "He could have bribed someone." Rage simmered in Alexander's veins. Elias had taken a private tragedy and warped it into a weapon. The whole fiasco with the building was to undermine Alexander, to remind him that no matter how high you climb, your vulnerabilities can still be used against you. Charles placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Be careful. Confronting him without evidence could be risky, but at least you now know who you're dealing with." Alexander nodded, pulses of adrenaline flooding his system. The revelation brought no solace. If anything, it deepened the emotional turmoil. He glanced toward the exit, spotting Cassandra watching him from afar. Her eyes flicked from him to the envelope in his hand, curiosity evident. He couldn't confront Elias publicly, not at that moment. But he had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. That evening, after the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Alexander found Cassandra in the estate's expansive kitchen, rummaging for a late-night snack. The overhead light illuminated her exhaustion. She looked up as he entered, the question in her gaze, wordless but clear. He set the envelope on the marble island. It was Elias Ward. She blinked, confused. Elias? I haven't heard that name in ages. He carved Adrian's name on the building. Alexander nodded, pulling out the still images and laying them before her. He had access knowledge and a grudge. It's all here. She studied the images, her face darkening. I still don't understand his motive. Revenge. I had to let him go from Horizon a few years back, after he'd jeopardized one of our major deals. He's held a grudge ever since. Cassandra let out a slow breath. So in his twisted mind, your grief became his ammunition. That's beyond cruel. Alexander reached for her hand, longing for a connection they'd both neglected. I'm sorry. For how I handled everything with Adrian. For how I erased his name from the nursery. None of this justifies that. But I want you to know I regret it. She didn't pull away. I know you hurt too, Alec, but it felt like you tried to wash him out of our lives the moment it got too painful. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I was wrong. They stood in quiet sorrow, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. For the first time in what felt like ages, they seemed united by the same sense of loss. Finally, Cassandra spoke. What are you going to do about Elias? Alexander inhaled. Confront him, but carefully. For now, I'll gather more definitive proof. Maybe we can keep it out of the courts. I just want him to understand there are consequences. Cassandra set the photos aside. I'll help however I can. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or a renewal of vows, but it was a step one that made Alexander's chest loosen just a fraction. 2 days later, Alexander received a cryptic text on his personal phone. We should talk. I have information you don't want made public. The bar at the Old Derby on Salem Street, 9 p.m. Come alone. It was unsigned, but the message felt like a signature of its own. Elias. Alexander hesitated. This was precisely the kind of clandestine meeting that could lead to a confrontation. Still, he needed to settle the issue. The swirl of rumors around the Haven complex had grown. Several local blogs were speculating about the mysterious name. He couldn't afford for the gossip to infect the project's reputation further, or to exploit Cassandra's private grief. At 9 p.m. sharp, Alexander arrived at the Old Derby, a dimly lit bar with dark wood booths and an ancient, dusty chandelier. No sign announced who owned it, but it was an open secret that the place was a hangout for shady deals and hush-hush conversations. He spotted Elias in a corner booth, swirling a half-empty glass of whiskey. Shorter than Alexander, but built sturdier. Elias had a face etched by cynicism. He smirked when he saw Alexander approach. I knew you'd come, Elias said, motioning for Alexander to sit. Alexander slid into the booth, crossing his arms. You've got a lot of nerve. Carving Adrian's name. My baby's name into my building to prove some twisted point. Elias raised a brow. It got your attention, didn't it? Alexander bristled. What do you want? Elias sipped his whiskey. An apology. Compensation. A chance at redemption. There was a time we were close friends, Alexander. I grew up with you. We planned on conquering the world together, but you kicked me to the curb without a second thought. You committed fraud, Alexander hissed. I had no choice. You always have a choice, Elias corrected, and I might have some interesting pieces of information that, if leaked, could shine a less than rosy light on your precious Haven empire. Not to mention some personal details about your marriage." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes aflame. "Is that a threat?" "It's business," Elias said, with an indifferent shrug. "But I'll consider it a personal favor if you reinstate me into Horizon Global Ventures in a senior capacity. Give me a stake in one of your next big projects. Let me back in the game." Alexander stared at him, a swirl of disgust and pity roiling. "You'd stoop this low?" Elias raised his glass in a mock toast. "Come on. We both know what your father taught us. Success is about leverage. I have leverage now." Alexander stood. "I won't be blackmailed." Elias shrugged, unbothered. "Then you can watch me dismantle your carefully curated world piece by piece. I wonder how the press would react if they learned the real reason behind that carved name. Or if certain financial transactions were put into public record." Alexander's fists clenched, but he forced himself to walk away. Engaging in violence or an open confrontation here would only complicate matters further. As he left the bar, Elias's eyes burned into his back. Outside, the chilly air stung his cheeks, matching the fury that flared in him. Back at Horizon Global Ventures, Alexander convened a small circle of trusted advisors: Miriam Kelly, Charles Deering, and an old ally, Jessica Freeman, the firm's head of compliance. They pored over files detailing Elias's previous projects, searching for any vulnerabilities or potential wrongdoing that Alexander could use as a counter-leverage. An exasperated sigh slipped from Alexander as they found only minimal leads. Elias's misdeeds were well documented from the prior scandal, but he had skillfully wiped most records beyond that. The man was cunning, leaving little behind that could incriminate him now. Cassandra, too, joined the meetings for the first time since the miscarriage. She offered a fresh perspective, though her role was mostly supportive. Alexander felt a glimmer of their old partnership, the synergy that had once made them unstoppable. Late one evening, while scanning the older architectural plans for the Haven complex, Cassandra found a cryptic note scrawled in the margins, a note referencing a specialized vault in the sub-basement designed for data storage, one that Elias had insisted on implementing when he was still with the company. "This sub-basement vault," she said, pushing the plan toward Alexander. "Do you remember authorizing it?" He furrowed his brow, scanning the document. "Not specifically. Elias was heading security protocols back then. He might have snuck it into the design." Charles leaned in, adjusting his reading glasses. "I recall some mention of a state-of-the-art data center, but we never used it. The project was scrapped after Elias left." Cassandra tapped her pen on the blueprint. If Elias had free rein to design it, maybe he stored something there, some leverage. Miriam nodded. "He might be counting on no one remembering this vault exists. It's possible he's stashed files there that he can threaten to reveal." Alexander stood. "We're going down there." Under the cover of night, Alexander, Cassandra. Miriam and Charles slipped into the Haven complex. They made their way to the sub-basement, guided by the dusty blueprint and the flicker of overhead fluorescent lights. Occasionally, a distant hum of machinery echoed through the concrete corridors. At the far end of a deserted hallway, they found the entrance to the vault, a nondescript metal door with an electronic keypad. Miriam produced a small hacking tool, courtesy of their IT department. She set to work, sweat beading on her forehead, until a faint click announced success. Inside, they discovered a chamber lined with racks meant for servers that never arrived. The air was musty thick with disuse. It took them a while to find anything unusual, until Cassandra noticed a steel cabinet in a corner. It was locked, but with a traditional padlock instead of advanced electronics. Charles pried it open with a crowbar. Inside sat a single external hard drive labeled HGV Archives. Next to it lay a dusty stack of documents. Their hearts pounded in unison. Alexander carefully lifted the drive. This must be Elias's stash. He rummaged through the papers, spotting spreadsheets, old memos, and references to questionable deals. Some were legitimate business records, others had confidential stamped across them in thick red letters. The final sheet in the pile drew his eye a ledger listing large sums of money, moving between shell companies, including suspicious references to Adelphi Holdings, a name Alexander had never encountered. They exchanged wary glances, suspecting that Elias had compiled these documents to blackmail the Haven family or any business partners. The question was, who was the real target? Miriam frowned. He might have documented wrongdoing in the Haven Empire, possibly your father's older deals, maybe your father's or your grandfather's, or he might have forged some parts to create false accusations. Either way, it's a time bomb. Cassandra brushed her fingers over the ledger. Could it be tied to your father's secret expansions overseas? I always found it strange how hush-hush Gordon was about certain properties in Europe and Asia. Alexander looked grim. This is more extensive than I imagined. My father might have skeletons buried in places I never knew existed. Charles cleared his throat. We should get these files analyzed, sort out what's real. If some of these are legitimate records, your father could face legal trouble. A wave of fatigue washed over Alexander. Elias had set a trap. Possibly Gordon was complicit in questionable dealings. If so, exposing this could shatter the entire Haven Foundation. But burying the truth would only empower Elias's blackmail attempts. After carefully photographing the documents, they left the vault, locking it behind them. Each step up the sub-basement stairs felt heavier. Alexander's mind raced with potential scenarios, from criminal investigations to media firestorms. But overshadowing all of it was the name Adrian. How the memory of his unborn son had been twisted into the crowbar that pried open these hidden secrets. The next morning, Alexander summoned Gordon to his estate, producing the files and confronting him directly. In Cassandra's presence, the older man examined the documents without betraying much emotion. Then he looked up, eyes icy. Elias was always a snake, he said simply. And you've proven yourself naive for letting him collect these. Alexander's voice shook with outrage. Don't deflect. These deals, offshore shell companies, questionable partnerships. This is bigger than Elias. Did you sign off on all this? Gordon's jaw tightened. I did what had to be done to keep our family's fortune intact. Do you have any idea the lengths I went to ensure the Havens remained powerful? We live in a harsh world, Alexander. Sometimes that means forging alliances and sealing deals in ways that aren't publicly palatable. Cassandra's hand flew to her mouth. That's your justification for money laundering bribery. Whatever else is in those documents, Gordon slammed his fist on the table. Do not judge me. Everything I did was for the family. I built an empire for you, Alexander. And here you are, unraveling it all because some ungrateful friend decided to toss around petty threats. Alexander inhaled sharply. Petty threats. He carved Adrian's name on our building to torment us. Don't you understand what this means to Cassandra and me? Gordon's gaze flicked toward Cassandra, momentarily softening. I'm sorry about your child. Truly. But from a business standpoint, Alexander cut him off. Stop. You can't reduce everything to business. This is our family. A tension-soaked silence stretched. Eventually, Cassandra intervened. "We need to decide what to do with Elias and with these files. If the media gets hold of this, your entire legacy is at risk." Gordon's lips thinned. "Offer him what he wants within reason, and bury this. The Haven name must remain unscathed." Alexander bristled. "No. I'm done paying for blackmail. We need to handle this differently." "Then handle it," Gordon said, rising from his seat. "But don't expect me to take the blame if you fail." He left in a swirl of expensive cologne and bitterness. Alexander clenched his jaw. Cassandra placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said. But even as she spoke, fear tinged her voice. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Alexander and Cassandra moved through the estate like ghosts, each lost in a storm of thoughts. Cassandra tried to break the silence more than once, but Alexander was too consumed with forging a strategy to defeat Elias without letting the blackmail files go public. One evening, as a cold rain battered the windows, Cassandra found Alexander in the study, staring at old family photos. He fixated on one of them, a shot of him and Cassandra in front of the nursery, just after she announced she was pregnant, both beaming with unrestrained joy. It felt like a lifetime ago. She sat beside him, sliding an arm around his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he leaned into her warmth, letting out a shaky breath. "I keep trying to hold everything together," he whispered, voice hoarse. "But maybe it's time to let it fall apart, so we can rebuild honestly." Cassandra hesitated, her fingers stroking his hair. "What do you mean? I mean, maybe we come clean. Let the authorities see those documents, see if there's wrongdoing, and if it implicates my father, so be it. I can't keep living in this twisted circle of blackmail and secrets." A tear escaped Cassandra's eye. "That's a huge risk, Alec. It could destroy the Haven name." He swallowed. "Our child was destroyed by secrets, too. I never told you how I truly felt after we lost Adrian, how broken I was. I tried to bury it, and it only caused more pain. I don't want to bury anything anymore." Cassandra's tears flowed freely. She cupped his cheeks, searching his gaze. "I've hated you for wiping out Adrian's name, for ignoring my grief. But part of me knew you were doing it out of your own heartbreak. I just couldn't face it. Maybe I needed to hate someone." Alexander held her close. "I'm sorry. Truly. I wish I could redo it all, but this is our only chance to make something right. If I have to risk the Haven name for it, I will." They held each other for a long time in silence, the patter of rain mixing with the gentle hum of their quiet sobs. Bolstered by Cassandra's support, Alexander arranged a meeting with an attorney experienced in corporate wrongdoing and whistleblowing cases. Cassandra insisted on joining, placing her own name on the line if it meant forging a path toward honesty. The attorney, Janet Huang, listened intently as they recounted the story. Elias's blackmail, the suspicious documents, Gordon's potential involvement. Janet tapped her pen on a legal pad. Her brow furrowed. "You could absolutely go to the authorities with this," Janet said. "But the repercussions will be swift. If your father is named, the press will devour the scandal. Your business empire could face asset freezes, investor pullouts. Worst case, you might be forced out of Horizon altogether." Alexander nodded grimly. "We understand. But if we let Elias hold this over us, we'll never be free." Janet leaned forward, eyes intense. "There is another approach. We can compile the documents properly, highlight any legitimate wrongdoing, and strike a deal with the authorities, cooperate fully in exchange for leniency, especially if you personally had no knowledge or involvement. Then you use that official stance to face Elias. If he tries to leak anything else, it'll either be old news or overshadowed by your proactive cooperation. Cassandra looked at Alexander, and he squeezed her hand. "Let's do it," he said. A week later, everything unfolded in a maelstrom. Alexander handed over the stash of documents to federal investigators. Gordon, upon learning of his son's plan, erupted in fury, threatening to disown Alexander and disclaim him from the Haven fortune. In a heated exchange, Alexander retorted that no legacy was worth sacrificing integrity. The media storm was immediate. Headlines blared, "Haven Empire under investigation." Stock prices wobbled. Enemies came out of the woodwork, piling on claims and rumors. Some of the documents did implicate Gordon in shady overseas dealings, though the extent of criminal liability remained uncertain. Elias, furious that Alexander had circumvented his blackmail, attempted to leak additional documents, but they were dismissed as either already in possession of investigators or irrelevant. The worst damage fell on Gordon's personal reputation. Alexander stood poised to lose a sizable chunk of the family wealth, but ironically his public image remained relatively unscathed. In some corners, he was hailed as a man who chose the moral high ground. Cassandra stood by him, offering unwavering support through the barrage of cameras and microphones. In the midst of chaos, they found themselves drawing closer, forging a new intimacy shaped by shared adversity and honesty. Amid the swirling fallout, Alexander decided to rectify his greatest regret. While Cassandra was away at a charity event, he snuck into the old nursery. Since the day he painted over the walls, the room had remained cold, empty, and lifeless. He reopened the sealed cans of paint, carefully mixing soft blues and greys, the same palette they had originally chosen. Next, with trembling hands, he painted the name Adrian in delicate lettering on the wall above where the crib once stood. He added small embellishments, little stars, a crescent moon evoking the night sky they had once envisioned for their child's peaceful dreams. When Cassandra returned that evening, she found him in the nursery, paintbrush in hand, tears slipping down his cheeks. He gestured silently to the wall. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She joined him, picking up a brush and adding her own finishing touches. They worked side by side, recreating what had been lost, forging a small sanctuary, not for a living child, but for a memory that would always hold a corner of their hearts. Afterward, they slumped together on the floor, leaning against the freshly painted wall. For the first time, the name Adrian brought them solace instead of sorrow. Several months later, the investigations concluded. Gordon faced penalties, steep fines, partial relinquishment of overseas assets, and a forced retirement from the board of Horizon Global Ventures. Alexander took the reins fully, albeit under the scrutiny of new compliance measures. The company survived battered but intact. For many employees, Alexander's willingness to confront corruption ignited a renewed faith in Horizon's future. Elias vanished from Boston's high society rumors, swirling that he fled the country. With no leverage left, his name faded into the background. Few missed him. During a quiet afternoon, Alexander and Cassandra strolled hand in hand through the Haven Complex Plaza. They paused at the stone panel near the entrance where Adrian had once been etched. A faint outline of the letters was still visible even after professional repairs. Instead of resentment, Alexander felt a gentle pang of remembrance. Cassandra rested her head on his shoulder. It's strange how it all turned out. Adrian's name brought so much conflict, but in the end, it brought us back together. Alexander nodded softly, kissing her temple. It's not the way I would have chosen, but I guess fate finds odd ways to guide us. She smiled through lingering sadness. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about maybe trying for another child one day. The corners of Alexander's mouth lifted. I'd like that, he whispered. And he knew despite the scars they were stronger than before. That evening they returned to the estate. Outside the nursery, Cassandra paused, placing her palm on the fresh paint. They didn't need to erase Adrian's memory anymore. Love and acceptance had replaced denial and guilt. In time, they would fill that house with laughter, and maybe, just maybe, Adrian's name would become a whisper of hope rather than a cry of loss. And there you have it, a tale of ambition and heartbreak, where a single etched name tore through family secrets and forced a reckoning that no one saw coming. In the end, Alexander and Cassandra found the courage to face the ghosts that haunted them, to stand up against blackmail, and to carve a new path defined not by hidden deals or erased memories, but by honesty and love. If this story resonated with you, reminding you that every challenge can be an opportunity to rediscover what truly matters, then help us share that message. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve into the heart of human drama tales of triumph, tragedy, and the unbreakable bonds that hold us together. Thank you for being part of this journey. We'll see you in the next story.